be doing Michigan State. So first I'll talk a little bit about the head coach, and then I'll talk some about the roster, and then I'll go through their schedule game by game and give you a predicted winner and loser for each game. So head coach Jonathan Smith enters his first season as the head coach at Michigan State, and this is his seventh season as a head coach. He was the head coach at Oregon State for 6 seasons before taking the job at Michigan State. And he was at 34 and 35 overall at Oregon State. But Oregon State was a horrible football program when he took over, and he had three bad seasons at first, but then the last 3 seasons they were improved. So his first 3 seasons were 2 wins, 5 wins, and 2 wins. But then in his fourth season, he got them to a bowl game and 7 wins. And then his fifth season, he got them to a 10-win season, which was only the third time Oregon State had ever done that. And then his sixth and final season there, which was last year, he got them to an 8-4 record, not coaching in the bowl game. And I think that Michigan State has found their coach. I think he's going to improve them, and some this season. I think he will. Recruiting this year was not great. They only ranked 42nd in recruiting, but those weren't all his recruits. And he did do a good job in the portal, getting the 12th ranked transfer portal group. So, starting on the offensive side of the roster at quarterback, I think they'll be much improved here. And as bad as Michigan State was at quarterback last season, I would say that they could only improve. But the Big Ten Conference had so many horrible quarterbacks that I can't really say that. But this coach brings in a quarterback from Oregon State who is a four-star recruit, a very talented passer and a great runner. His name is Aiden Childs. He is not very experienced though. He only played last season as a backup, and that's his only season of college football. He's a sophomore. He only threw 35 passes last season, but he did complete 24 of them, which was a 68.6%, and he had 309 passing yards, averaging 8.8 yards a throw, and threw 4 touchdown passes. So in the little amount of time that he was in there, he looked good, and he also had 79 rushing yards on 17 carries and 3 rushing touchdowns, averaging 4.6 yards a carry. And at wide receiver, though, this is concerning. They only have one proven wide receiver on their roster, and they didn't make any transfer portal additions. So his name is Montori Foster, who had last season 43 catches for 576 and 3 touchdowns, averaging 13.4 a catch. But for Michigan State's offense to be good, they're going to have a few other receivers step up. And running back, though, looks really good. I think this will be the biggest strength of Michigan State's offense. They've got Nate Carter coming back, who was the starting running back last season, and he's one of the better running backs of the Big Ten. He had last season 798 yards on 185 carries and 4 touchdowns, averaging 4.3 a carry, and he had 3 games of over 100 rushing yards. And they bring in a transfer running back from Massachusetts, Kayron Lynch Adams, who had last season 1,157 yards on 236 carries and 12 touchdowns, averaging 4.9 a carry. So that should be a nice two running backs for Michigan State this season. And Michigan State was a horrible rushing team last year, ranking 125th in the country, uh, averaging only 89.5 rushing yards per game. Those numbers should improve by a lot this year. And the offensive line, though, is not great overall. They only returned one starter. Now, they did add in 2 transfers. that are good. This coach brings in his center from Oregon State, who is one of the best in the country. He was an All-American center last season. His name is Tanner Miller, and then he brings in a transfer guard. His name is Luke Newman. He comes from an FCS team, but he is really good. He only allowed one sack and five total pressures on 706 snaps there last season, and he's the size of a power four offensive lineman at 6'4", 310. So I think he'll do really well for them. So Michigan State's offense, I think, will be much improved this year. It was, horrible last year, but still, I think it's not going to be that good of an offense. I don't think the roster is good enough for that yet, but it should be more of an average offense. So now on the defensive side, the defensive line is not that good. They don't have any starters returning, and they did bring in four transfers, but none of them are great. And they lost their two really good defensive linemen this spring in the portal. So linebacker though, it looks to be really good. Michigan State has one of the best groups of linebackers in the Big Ten. So they have Jordan Hall, who had last season 67 tackles and four and a half sacks and a forced fumble and a pass breakup. And then they have Cal Holiday, who has played in 37 games and has 300 tackles in that and five sacks and three interceptions and two pass breakups and two defensive touchdowns and four fumble recoveries and two forced fumbles and 27 total pressures. And then they have a transfer coming in, Wayne Matthews from Old Dominion, who had last season 135 tackles and three and a half sacks and three forced fumbles and a fumble recovery and three pass breakups and 11 total pressures. Then they also bring in a transfer from Wisconsin, Jordan Turner, who had in 24 games 126 tackles and five sacks and three pass breakups. And then Michigan State's secondary looked to be really good too. So at cornerback, they return Angelo Gross, who has in 33 games that combined these past three seasons, 206 tackles and 15 pass breakups and three interceptions. And then they have Charles Brantley, who only played in three games last season because of an injury, but in 2022 had in 11 games 48 tackles and six pass breakups and an interception. And then they bring in a transfer corner from Arizona State. His name is Ed Woods. He was one of the Pac-12's best corners at these past two seasons, having in 20 games 61 tackles and 10 pass breakups and three forced fumbles and an interception and a sack. And then they look good at safety. They've got Malik Spencer coming back, who had last season at 73 tackles and six pass breakups, and Dylan Tatum, who had in 9 games last season 45 tackles and seven pass breakups. So the defense should be much improved this year. It was really bad last year. Uh, and special teams looks to be good too. Both specialists return who did a really good job for them last year. So this is a decent roster, just not a great roster, and a roster with some weaknesses and strengths. So now moving on to the predictions. They start the year against FAU, Florida Atlantic, which should be an easy win. And then they play on the road at Maryland. So Maryland, I don't think is going to be any good this year. Their defense it should be okay, but their offense has been carried by that quarterback Tonga Viola, who's left them, and he's really what's kept them to being an average team these past several seasons. and I don't think Maryland's going to be very good on offense this year without him. And I think even on the road, Michigan State gets this win. So this one though could go either way. I think it'll be a really close game. So then Prairie View A&M, that'll be an easy win. And then they play on the road at Boston College. Boston College isn't going to be very good. They never are, but they're not going to be terrible. I've looked at their roster, and they do have some good players on their team. They're going to be a great rushing team, and I think that could be a problem with Michigan State's defensive line not being that good. And I think that these two teams are pretty similar. Michigan State, I think, may be a little bit better than Boston College, but it's close enough to where I think Boston College, having the home field advantage, gets a really close win. But this is one Michigan State could get. Boston College is not a tough place to play. One of the worst home field advantages for a team in the country. And then Ohio State, this will be a huge blowout loss. This is going to show that Michigan State still has a long way to go from being close to the top of the Big Ten. But this game will be ugly from the beginning to the end. Ohio State will score 40 something points, I think, in this game. Michigan State won't be able to stop them very much. And Ohio State's defense is going to be so good to where I think they'll still shut down Michigan State's offense, even though their offense is going to be improved this year. It's not going to be good enough to score much on defenses like Ohio State. So, and then on the road at Oregon, this will be another big blowout loss. Everything that I just said about Ohio State goes for Oregon. They've also got an elite offense and an elite defense, and Oregon will score a whole lot of points in this game, at 40 something probably, and shut down Michigan State's offense. Now, Ohio State has a little bit better defense, I think, than Oregon, and Oregon has a little bit better offense than Ohio State, but both teams are very similar. Uh, so then they play Iowa at home after getting a week off. I'm not real high on Iowa. Their defense is going to be great. They've got a whole lot coming back on that side of the ball, but their offense, as you know, is like non-existent. And Michigan State's offense, I think, will be good enough to where now they can score a little bit on Iowa, not a lot, uh, but they won't get shut out, I don't think. And Michigan State's defense, the defensive line is nowhere close to as good as Iowa's, but everywhere else at linebacker and in the secondary, Michigan State can match up pretty well with Iowa. And on offense, Michigan State has a better quarterback, and Iowa has no good receivers. And Michigan State's got a better running back unit, and the offensive line for Iowa is no better than Michigan State's offensive line. So playing at home, this will be a really close game and low scoring, but I think Michigan State has enough to get this win. So then they play on the road at Michigan. This will be a loss. It won't be as bad, I don't think, as the Ohio State and Oregon games will be, but I think Michigan will pull away and win by like 17 or 18 points. Their defense is going to be so good, and it'll shut down Michigan State's offense probably almost completely in this game. And Michigan won't score a lot. Their offense isn't going to be very good, but they've got a better play at the line of scrimmage than Michigan State does. Their offensive line, I think, will beat Michigan State's defensive line, and they'll be able to run the football with Donovan Edwards in this game, and probably win it like 24-7 or 27-10, something like that. So then they play Indiana at home. I had a really hard time with this one. I think it's a pretty even game. So Indiana, I think, is going to be maybe the most improved team this season with the new coach they brought in and all of the good players they brought in from the portal, and I think they've got a better team than Michigan State does this year, at least by a little bit. But it's close enough to where I think with this game being at Michigan State, I think Michigan State has enough to get this win, but I think it'll be really close, like no more than a field goal win. So then they play on the road at Illinois after getting a week off. Illinois is not going to be very good, but I think they've got a little better offensive line than Michigan State and better wide receivers. Now, I like Michigan State's new quarterback better than I do Luke Altmaier at Illinois. I don't think he's very good. And Michigan State has a better running back unit. And Michigan State has a better overall defense than Illinois, but it's close enough to where I think home field advantage gives Illinois this win by a really close score. So then they play Purdue at home. I think they'll win this game. This one is one that Michigan State might win by a couple of scores. Purdue is a horrible team. They don't really have any real big strengths to their team. Almost their whole team is weak. And then Rutgers to end the season at home. This one will be close. Rutgers, I think, has a much better defensive line than Michigan State does. And I think Rutgers has a little bit better offensive line. I think they've got better play at the line of scrimmage. But Rutgers is going to be horrible at throwing the ball this year, and that's already bad enough. And Michigan State has a great secondary too, and that's going to make them completely one-dimensional offensively in this game. And Rutgers, I think, will be able to run a little in this game with Michigan State's weaker defensive line. But the linebackers for Michigan State being really good will help them stop the run too. And I just don't think there's going to be very many points in this game. I think it'll be low scoring. And Michigan State can match Rutgers everywhere else defensively. And I think they actually have a better linebacker group than Rutgers does. And I think both teams are very similar, so I'm just going to take the home team and say Michigan State wins a really close one. So my final prediction for Michigan State is 7-5 overall, and 5-4 in the conference, which would put them at a 3-win improvement from last season and back to a bowl game. And this is probably about their ceiling for this year. I could see them losing several more games than I have them losing. Probably the worst case would be last year's at 4-8 record. But that will be it with this video. Please subscribe and thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon.